In our last few stories, we heard about that period of time, roughly 325 years, when God's Old Testament people, Israel, and what is now the nation state of Israel that has conquered and inhabited the Promised Land, how for that 325 years roughly, she had been led by judges, by God Himself as their king. The people, however, were very insistent about wanting their own earthly king. And beginning with story 46, we will hear in the next few stories about the first three kings that ruled over ancient Israel, beginning about the year 1100 BC. Saul, the first king of Israel. When Samuel was old, he made his sons judges in Israel, but they did not walk in his ways. Then the elders of Israel gathered in Ramah and said to Samuel, "You are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. So choose a king to judge us, like all the other nations have." Samuel didn't like their idea, so he prayed to the Lord. "Listen to everything they say," the Lord answered Samuel. "They have not rejected you, but they have rejected me. They don't want me to reign over them. Since the day I brought them out of Egypt, they have wanted to serve other gods. Protest solemnly. Show them the kind of king they will have, one who will take their sons and daughters to work as slaves and fight for him. He will take their best fields and vineyards and give them to his servants. He will take 1/10 of what they produce and give it to his officers. They will finally cry out for help, but the Lord will not hear them." When Samuel told the people this, they would not listen. "We want a king over us. We want to be like other nations that have a king who fights their battles," they said. Samuel heard what the people said and reported it to the Lord. "Listen to them. Choose a king for them," the Lord said. It's really a sad thing, but God's Old Testament people preferred an earthly king to the king, the Almighty King, God Himself, who had been reigning over them. But no, they wanted something different. And it was a sad, sad thing when they rejected God and desired for themselves an earthly king, who God warned them would not be the wonderful panacea that they might have otherwise thought. There was a man of the tribe of Benjamin named Kish who had a son named Saul. Saul was an impressive man among the children of Israel, a head taller than everyone else. When Kish's donkeys were lost, he said to Saul, "Take one of the servants along with you and go find them." Saul searched the hills of Ephraim through the land of Shalisha, Shalamin, and the land of the Benjamites, but he did not find them. When they came to Zuph, Saul was ready to return home, but the servant said, in this city is a man of God. Everything he says happens. Let's go to him so he can show us what we should do." As they went into the city, Samuel was coming out. Now the Lord had told Samuel the day before Saul came, "Tomorrow about this time I will send a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him to be captain over my people Israel, so he can save my people from the Philistines." When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord said to him, "Look, this is a man of whom I spoke. He shall reign over my people." By then Saul was closer to Samuel by the gate. "Tell me, I pray," Saul said to Samuel, where the seer's house is." "I am the seer," Samuel answered. "Go ahead of me to the high place. Today you will eat with me. Tomorrow I will let you go after I tell you answers for all the things you have on your mind. As for the donkeys you were looking for, don't worry about them. They have been found. Soon you and your family will have all that is desirable in Israel." Saul ate with Samuel that day and stayed with him at his house that night. Early in the morning, Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on Saul's head, kissed him, and said, "The Lord has anointed you to be captain over his inheritance Israel." When Saul turned to leave Samuel, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and all the signs happened as Samuel said. So God finally gives in, and He's going to give the people what they want. It's not going to turn out to be a wonderful thing, But nevertheless, he allows them to have their earthly king. And then God brings this tall, strong-looking guy Saul to him, and God had told him that he was the one he was to anoint to be the first king in Israel. Samuel called the people together to worship the Lord at Mizpah. When they were all gathered, Samuel said, "You have rejected the Lord and asked for a king. Now stand before the Lord according to your tribes and clans." When all the tribes of Israel came, the tribe of Benjamin was selected. When the tribe of Benjamin came, according to the family, Saul was selected from among them. But when they looked for him, he could not be found. When they asked the Lord if they should still have Saul come forward, the Lord told them, "He is hiding in all the baggage." When they found him, he stood among the people. He was a head taller than anyone else. Samuel said to the people, "Can you see the one whom the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him." And all the people shouted, "Long live the king!" After Samuel told the people the rules of the kingdom that he had written in a book, he laid it before the Lord. Then all the people returned home. Saul went home to Gibeah, along with a group of people whose hearts God had touched. But some troublemakers said, "How can this man save us?" Saul remained silent when he heard this. Soon Nahash and the Ammonites laid siege to Jabesh Gilead. Finally the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, "Make a treaty with us, and we will serve you." "I will make a treaty with you on this condition," Nahash answered. "I get to gouge out your right eyes so I can disgrace Israel." "Give us 7 days," the elders of Jabesh said to him, "so that we can send messengers all over Israel to see if anyone will come to save us. If not, we will surrender to you." When the messengers came to Gibeah and told this news to the people, everyone cried. Just then Saul came from a field, walking behind some oxen. "Why are the people crying?" he asked. When they told him the news from Jabesh, the Spirit of God came on Saul. He became angry and cut a pair of oxen into pieces. Then he sent the pieces throughout Israel with messengers who said, "This is what will happen to the oxen of anyone who does not follow Saul and Samuel." Then the fear of the Lord came upon the people, and 330,000 men came out all ready to fight. "Tell the men of Jabesh Gilead, by tomorrow noon you will have help," he told the messengers. The next day Saul put the soldiers in 3 companies and attacked the Ammonites. They slaughtered the Ammonites by noon. Those who lived were so scattered that no 2 were left together. The people said to Samuel, "Whoever said, 'Shall Saul reign over us?' Bring them so we can put them to death." "No one shall be put to death this day," Saul said, "for today the Lord has rescued Israel." Then the people went with Samuel to Gilead to offer sacrifices, or to Gilgal to offer sacrifices of peace to the Lord, and Saul and all the people of Israel rejoiced. Well, while things may have started a bit shaky, they seem to have gotten off on a pretty good foot here. Saul does answer the call from help from his brother Israelites, and he responds and he sends out the word, and moved by God, the people respond, and moved by God, Saul gives credit for the ensuing military victory, not to himself and his greatness or his strategy or his strength or might, but he gives the credit for God. And he shows mercy in the face of those who would have wanted to put his distractors to death. So, hey, maybe Saul is starting off okay. Samuel reminded the people to continue following the Lord. The Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake, because it pleases the Lord to make you his people. Samuel said, "God forbid that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. I will teach you the good and the right way. Only fear the Lord and serve him with all your heart. Remember the great things he has done for you." After Saul had reigned over Israel for 2 years, he led the Israelites into a battle against the Philistines. When Jonathan defeated the Philistine garrison at Geba, Saul spread the news throughout Israel that he had defeated the Philistines. When the Philistines heard about it, they prepared to fight Israel with 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and as many foot soldiers as there is sand on the seashore. They gathered at Michmash, east of Bethaven. When Israel saw that they were in trouble, they hid themselves in caves, thickets, rocks, and pits. Some fled across the Jordan. All the people following Saul in Gilgal were afraid. He waited there 7 days, according to the directions Samuel had given. When Samuel did not come to Gilgal, the people began leaving. "Bring me the burnt offerings and the peace offerings," Saul said. Then he offered the burnt offerings. As soon as he made the offerings, Saul arrived. "What have you done?" Samuel asked. "I saw the people leaving me, and you didn't come during the 7 days, and the Philistines were gathering at Michmash. So I said, 'The Philistines will attack me at Gilgal when I have not prayed to the Lord.' So I forced myself to make the burnt offering." "You have done foolishly," Samuel said to Saul. "You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God as he commanded. Now your kingdom will not continue. The Lord will be looking for a man after his own heart to be captain over his people, because you have not done what the Lord commanded." At another time, Samuel told Saul, "Go and destroy Amalek and all that they own. Don't spare them." So Saul gathered the people together and destroyed the Amalekites. He captured Agag the king and kept the best of the sheep, oxen, and lambs. The rest of the people and animals were destroyed. Then the Lord told Samuel, "It grieves me that I made Saul king. He has not followed me or done what I commanded." When Samuel reached Saul at Gilgal, Saul said to him, "The Lord bless you. I have followed the commands of the Lord." "What is this bleating of sheep I hear?" Samuel asked. "And what about the lowing of cows?" "The people spared the best of the sheep and oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God," Saul answered. "We have destroyed the rest." "Stop. Listen to what the Lord told me to tell you last night," Samuel said to Saul. "The Lord said, 'When you thought you were incapable, I made you king of Israel. I told you to destroy the Amalekites. Why did you disobey? It is better to obey God than to sacrifice. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king.'" As Samuel turned to leave, Saul grabbed the hem of his robe and it tore. "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day," Samuel said to him, "and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you are." Samuel went to Ramah. Until the day he died, Samuel did not go to see Saul, but he mourned for him. So Saul starts off pretty well, but in a relatively short amount of time, about 2 years, we begin to hear that Saul is beginning to take credit for things himself rather than giving credit to God. We find out that he's not following the instructions that God is giving him via Samuel. He's doing things his own way. He's doing what might seem to make sense to him, even if it's not in accordance with what God has said. And there's a warning here for all of God's people, Old Testament and New, to heed God's word and to submit, and to not begin to think too highly of our own accomplishments or our own ideas or our own thoughts about how things should be. Ultimately, Saul is a disappointing king in the history of Israel, and he will be supplanted by another. Story 47, David anointed king. "How long will you mourn for Saul?" the Lord said to Samuel, "since I have rejected him as the king of Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go to the house of Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." Samuel did what the Lord told him. When they came, Samuel saw Eliab, Jesse's oldest son, and thought, "Surely this is the Lord's anointed, standing here before the Lord." "Don't look at his appearance or his height," the Lord said to Samuel, "because I have not chosen him. The Lord does not look at the same things man does. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." Then Jesse introduced Abinadab to Samuel. "The Lord has not chosen him either," Samuel said. Jesse presented 6 more of his sons to Samuel. "The Lord has not chosen any of these," Samuel said. "Are these all your children?" "There is the youngest," Jesse replied. "He is taking care of the sheep." "Send for him," Samuel said. "We won't sit down until he comes." So Jesse sent for David. He was ruddy, good-looking, with handsome features. The Lord said to Samuel, "Go ahead, anoint him. He is the one." Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him. From that day on, the Spirit of the Lord was with David. Samuel then went back to Ramah. Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit troubled him. His servants suggested that they find a skillful harpist, someone who could play when an evil spirit from God came to him. "Then you will be well," they said. One of the servants said, "I have seen a son of Jesse from Bethlehem who can play well. He is courageous, fights well, speaks prudently, and is quite handsome. The Lord is with him." Then Saul sent messengers to Jesse who said, "Send me David, your son, who is with the sheep." David came to Saul and became his armor-bearer. When the evil spirit came upon Saul, David would play the harp. Then Saul would feel better, and the evil spirit would leave him. So we find out that the second king over God's Old Testament people, Israel, is to be David, a shepherd boy, that from the telling of the story we almost get the impression that even his dad didn't necessarily think he was a prime candidate to be king. The older boys, the more mature, Jesse thought would make a better king. But God doesn't look at things the way we people do. And while the description of David may sound pretty pleasant in our modern ears, this notion of him taking care of the sheep and him playing a harp and being handsome, this doesn't sound like much of a warrior king necessarily. Remember, Saul's claim to fame was how tall he was, how big and strong, and what a great leader. And now we have this much smaller, probably, little shepherd boy, and he is to become perhaps the greatest king in Old Testament Israel, of course, and it would be one of his descendants born in Bethlehem who would be the great king of God's people, both Old and New Testament, who would be born many years later in Bethlehem. Now, David and Saul's paths intersect when David is brought in to kind of soothe Saul by playing his harp. He then kind of helps Saul, becomes his armor bearer. And Saul probably doesn't have any clue at this point that David is going to be the one who will replace him as the king of Israel. But these two figures are brought into the same sphere of history.